WNYC Studios is supported by Forward. Did you know 40% of deaths from leading causes are preventable? Forward doctors use cutting-edge technology to identify and address any underlying health issues before they become a problem. Get started at goforward.com/WNYC. That's goforward.com/WNYC.
Listener supported. WNYC Studios.
A note to listeners, our next conversation may contain a discussion of sexual abuse and suicide. We wanted to let you know. Documentary theater has given us some of the most affecting work on Broadway in recent years. The play Dana H. is culled directly from interviews of Dana Higginbotham, a former hospice and psych ward chaplain who a violent white supremacist kidnapped. She'd shown kindness to the man named Jim, who she met after his suicide attempt. Jim broke into her home and dragged her out. He kept her as a physical and emotional hostage for 5 months, abusing and raping her and taunting her that he wouldn't be caught because so many in law enforcement were sympathetic to his politics and affiliation with an organized hate group. And according to her account, he was right. The audience hears Dana in her own words. The play is a soundtrack of Dana's actual voice, performed on stage by an actor. Here's a bit of the trailer for the show Dana H.
I was a psych chaplain at the hospital in 97 when it happened. And in my first meeting with him, he tells me he said, I've been involved in some really bad stuff and I want to turn my life around. There was a time when he left, yeah. He came back banging on the door at my place. And I knew by the sound of his voice and the force of the banging that this was not good. He demonstrated how a guy hit him, and that's when he hit me. And I fell over backwards. I was unconscious, and that was the beginning of the end. That was the beginning of the 5 months.
Lip syncing doesn't really do justice to what my next guest, Deirdre O'Connell, accomplishes with her universally admired performance. She is a vessel for those words. She's not miming or mimicking a woman. She is Dana H. for the duration of the play. Even if Deirdre isn't using her own voice, she's using everything else she has at her disposal. The play was created by Lucas Nath, whose mother is Dana Higginbotham. Many of the stellar reviews describe Dana H. as, quote, harrowing and transfixing. The New York Times said of Dana H., it is, quote, the richest, most complete work of theater to come along in many a season. And New York Magazine described it as unmissable. That latter description is a bit bittersweet. Because of the strange and challenging economics of theater at the moment, the Broadway run of Dana H. has been cut short by a few months, and it will only be at the Lyceum Theater for another 2 weeks until November 14th. So if you can, go see it. And who knows, fingers crossed, maybe it will find life somewhere else. Joining me now is Obie and Drama Desk Award-winning actor Deirdre O'Connell. Deirdre, thank you for being with us.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
Before you either entertained whether or not to work on this piece, what did you first think when you heard about the story of Dana Higginbotham's account of her kidnapping and her torture?
It was so, the whole question of whether whether to do the piece or not was so connected to the idea of lip syncing her and to the clarity that Lucas had about how to tell a story that has as little space between the writer and the audience, to be able to have it be, this is actually what she is saying. Partly because I think we're so used to questioning the narrator in cases like this. And a part of the reason for that is often people don't behave the way we expect them to, as an actor, I've certainly been the person on the the stand in court on Law and Order, behaving the way that we expect a person who's been traumatized to behave many times. And when you actually listen to Dana, she's got a very straightforward approach to telling the story, and she's got her feet firmly on the ground, and she finds parts of it funny, but mostly she's just able to move through the tale almost as a I think that she did move through the tale as an act of therapy for herself by writing it all down. It took her about a year to make a transcript where she wrote down everything she could possibly remember. And she did that many years later, because she realized that she was haunted in ways that she had thought she had recovered from. So, but I think what it was the underground nature of what had happened to her. There were two things. There was the underground nature of it, the fact that a world that she didn't understand existed under, that there was a system of understanding between certain organizations and the police, and she couldn't find her way to getting help because of it. And she couldn't understand why she couldn't get help while she was in the middle of it. It was only later when she looked at it that she sort of realized, wait, I was in a strange web. People knew what they were saying to each other. There were signals going on that I didn't know anything about, and still don't, but I can tell there were signals. And the other thing was the I just had it. It was that, and it was also the I'll come back to it. I can't remember exactly what the second thing I was going to say was. Well, I bet I'm not the only interviewee who's had that happen.
When it comes back to you, just shout out.
Okay, I'll be like, wait, this is the other thing I wanted to say.
Yes, go. Oh, okay.
Oh, you know what it was? Oh, I do remember it. And it had to do with the perfect storm nature of it. It had to do with how a person who is firmly has their feet on the ground, owns a house, is in a marriage, has a kid. She's not an outlier in the society with quotes around it. She's a person who could subscribe to any of these theaters and be sitting in the seat next to you. She found herself in this extreme situation because of a very a clear layer of events, a divorce happening, the losing of a house, the kid going to college for the first year. There were just very specific things that kind of left her in a situation where she was alone in a way that she hadn't been for many years, and that could happen to any of us, and that the tethers that sort of keep us feeling like we're firmly placed in a safe spot in the world are actually very fragile. And that this isn't the story of something that couldn't happen to any of us. So that was another thing that really intrigued me. It's almost like the piece is a list. It's a very clear list of if this and this and this, and you were doing this particular kind of work with these particular kinds of patients in the hospital, and you were doing this particular thing, and you made these particular choices, some of which maybe you wouldn't make, to bring someone home at Christmas, to really, really have an idea that you could help somebody through the therapy you were doing with them. But, there's a lot of things that some people might not do, but she's a person of enormous empathy and gifts with this work that she was doing, and continues to be. That always interested me. Like, what are the steps that are between us and finding ourselves in these extreme situations? And not being able to separate ourselves from that by saying, well, that would never happen to me. I would never let that happen to me.
One review described your performance as a, quote, how did she do that performance? And you've described having to use your brain differently to prepare. What was different about preparing for this piece than when you would prepare for any other long one-woman show or one-woman monologue?
It was a funny thing. I feel like I ran into some right brain, left brain stuff that I don't really understand the science of, but I sure was in the middle of it, where I would, if I completely spent the grueling time of learning, say, one of the pages. So say that would take 2 days, and I would be like, okay, I can actually recite this page. And then I would take the grueling time of trying to learn the track and learn the rhythms of it and learn the breaths of it, through listening to it. then I would put those two things together and think, this is going to be the triumphant day when I put them together. And literally there would be like, I could feel it cancel each other out. It was the strangest and saddest feeling because I would work so hard. And then I would find myself, just with like wet toilet paper in my hands after working so hard. So it took a long time for me to be able to, I think it's literally taken the years that I've been doing it, because we've done it a lot. We did it in Los Angeles, we did it in Chicago, and we did it here for a while. So, and with the pandemic, giving us a nice long break, it's ended up being years, and I feel like those years are actually part of what you're seeing is that I have found my brain, my involuntary brain has actually found a way to handle the information and filter it. And it took a while for that surrender to happen, for that click to happen. But I had to have all the grueling work in place before I started to be able to relax into having the memory of both things, what the words actually say on the page and what the music of it is. It must be like being a concert pianist or something. It's not something that actors have to do that much, is have a weird kind of mechanical memory, or a weird kind of just the kind of precision as dancers and musicians get to do it. But it's an unusual practice for an actor, and one that I love. Yeah. I didn't know I would when I signed on, so I was pretty scared. I was pretty nervous that what if I hate this?
Right.
Which seemed like a real possibility, because I could feel very claustrophobic. And also very like, oh my God, my expressive instrument is not being used, but I don't end up feeling that way. I feel like my expressive instrument is being like filtered through a very tight tube in a good way.
My guest, Deirdre O'Connell. We're talking about Dana H. at the Lyceum Theater. So it's really interesting. When you take the stage, you're in a nondescript motel room, and we see you being fitted for the earpieces.
Which is especially exciting in the Lyceum, because the Lyceum has lots of chandeliers and stuff, so it's quite beautiful in there. And it's like, we really mean it. We're a plain motel room. We're not kidding. When you do it off Broadway, it's a little bit more like, plain motel room. That's cool. When you do it in the Lyceum, it's aggressive.
Yeah, that's interesting. That was my other question, but I'll circle back to the other one in a second. What do you think the audience member gets out of this simple but kind of eerie setting? That setting is so brilliant, and it's something that I certainly wasn't in the room when they came up with that idea. By the time I arrived on the scene, that was definitely written down in the script. And I think it was not a simple thing to come up with, the idea that would be where it would take place. I mean, if you read it on the page or you think about it, you think, well, you're just going to plunk a chair in the middle of the stage and have the lady tell the story. And the idea of putting it in a motel room isn't necessarily it's not inevitable. And where is she when we're doing the interview? It's not. It doesn't necessarily say on any level she and Steve are sitting in a motel room. But there's something about that setting, that particular lonely, strange setting that evokes so much of the time that she spent. And I feel, and I don't think you ever go, well, wait a second, why is she in a motel room telling the story? I don't think you ever ask that question, because it seems natural that maybe she and Steve did find themselves in one. It's a neutral space. They rented one in order to do these interviews. It's not, but but I think it just evokes, without you having to really think about it a lot, what it's like to be trapped in one of those kinds of rooms, which I think we often feel, even if we've found ourselves there for all kinds of good reasons. We had to travel somewhere to go to a funeral or whatever. We're like, oh, there's only one room available. It's so sad in here. Yeah. That feeling is something we all sort of know. The smell of it is something we all know. I want to ask, when you come to the stage, it's
looks
so
like a
interesting.
Stage set to a certain extent.
Yeah, and there's an audio tech who comes and fits your earpieces. How does that transparency help this production and help tell this story?
I think it helps. It helps we keep teaching the audience through the fact that that I'm on headphones listening to the same thing you're listening to, and know that I'm doing this task that has this real rigor to it, that you know that I can't like wait for you to finish laughing. We learn the rules of it all very fast. And we also know that it's edited because you can hear the little blips. So we make sure that you can tell when there's a cut in the track, because the interview went on for many days, so it's very long. So we've cut something together, but we are not hiding the cuts. I think it reminds the audience constantly that this really happened and that this is someone talking about something that really happened to them. At the very least, you're listening to somebody talk about something that happened to them. It keeps reminding you, what my participation in it is, that I am the conduit, I'm the medium for this, but that this happened to a real person, and the real person's voice and the real person's breath is what you're witnessing. So I think it just keeps narrowing the gap between did this really happen, and because if there was any, I think Lucas always said, if there was ever any question that he, clever playwright that he is, wrote a fantastic story and was putting it on stage, it would be such a different thing, because it would be like, well, that was well imagined, but it wouldn't necessarily be, I can't imagine how that actually happened, and I've been told it did. Very different experiences.
Yeah, I'm curious for you. The kidnapping and the assault happened, I believe, in 1998. And then she sat down and told the story to one of her son's friends who recorded it, who's very passive and just lets her tell the story. Do you know what happened between that time? And did it inform your performance at all? Or did you make something up?
I feel like I do know, and I mean, she lived life. But part of what happened, she describes at the beginning, which is that several years later, and I'm not going to have the exact number of years right, so I'm not going to say, but I would say several, like 10. She found herself having odd PTSD symptoms and having a harder and harder time maintaining herself. She had strange low fevers, had strange, at one point one of her arms was paralyzed. She doesn't describe that in the piece, but she describes like having having moments where she blacked out, and she realized that she had not really, and she's a chaplain in mental hospital, so she knows what she's dealing with here, but she sort of realized she had to take herself through her own form of therapy for this, that she had not looked at what had happened, and she did not have a clear memory of what had happened. So she actually had taken family leave because of her symptoms, and she hadn't been able to work. She was working as a hospice worker at the time, and she took a long time off and worked, actually, I think she was detailing motorcycles. Yes, isn't that cool? And she would spend most of her time writing the manuscript, which she refers to a lot in the piece, which was just the description of what had happened as best as she could remember it, and putting it in the order. The order of the events was very important for her. Yeah. I feel like that's kind of a reflection of the thing I was talking about at the beginning. How did this happen to me? What are the steps that occur that leave somebody so untethered? So I think she really had to go back over that to be able to understand and to unravel and she gradually was able to cure herself of the symptoms of the trauma through just this very careful writing of this document, which she refers to a lot in the piece. Then years later is the step that we're in now, which is she and Lucas making this piece together, and partly through having this interview with someone who wasn't Lucas, so that she could tell the story in a rather pure form, so that he could hear it again without being in the room while she was telling it. It's interesting. I think a lot about how we witness our parents and how difficult that is to witness them without, fearlessly, and that Lucas has found this way to do that with her that is so beautiful to me and so daunting to me. I can't imagine doing it quite, but I think it's a pretty interesting thing.
Yeah.
We all get to participate.
Deirdre, as an actor, your voice is one of your most important tools. But like a lot of things, when one thing isn't available to you, other things take over. We reach into other parts of ourselves and our lives and how we do what we do. I'm curious, what other parts of your toolkit became important, and how has this? I'm not saying changed, but how has this affected the way you think about acting? One
of the main things aside from my voice, which is the rhythm of the writing, the fact that the rhythm is that I don't get to control the rhythm of it at all, that I don't get to take a really groovy pause, right? I think it might be nice to set something up, or when I would feel, and I think about this, like, what if this piece was written down and I had to learn it, and then I was going to stand up and perform it for you guys, or sit in a chair. I must really, I don't want to shortchange any of this material. So when would I have over pitched it a little bit? When would I have? It's the kinds of questions that you ask yourself constantly when you're performing, of like, ooh, should I have given that a little more zhuzh? Should I have pause a little longer and let them have that moment a little more? Should I be? You just, those questions are just pouring through your mind the whole time, and when you're lucky, you slow them down and turn them off a little bit. But in this case, I don't have those options, and so there's a real relief in knowing that those decisions are made already, and there's something else that's occurring, which is kind of similar to the way that she wants to tell the story. And it's a funny thing. The brilliant guy who's coached my lip syncing, Steve Schiffo, was saying to me when I first started working at that, she would sound different to me every day. And I was like, well, that's literally impossible. And she does.
Interesting.
It's funny. It's like some days it seems like, oh, now she's scratching her head. That didn't come yesterday. Or she seems really sad today. This seems to really have made her depressed. Or she seems really on top of it and slightly defiant of anybody who's going to question whether this actually happened or not. Or she seems really, there's just and of course it's projection, but I don't experience it that way. I experience it like she actually sounds different. A little bit different each time. But I think that there was one thing that I've done in between that was it's a play by Adam Bach called Before the Meeting, and it's about an AA meeting, and in it, one of the tasks that I had was to actually do a 25-minute talking to the fellow members in the meeting, and so it was kind of a setup similar to what's going on now, and way in which I understood how we as real people tend to sit less, when we tend to demonstrate our emotional availability less. There's just things that we do as actors that we think is kind of like what the exchange is. Like, that's what you came to see, right? And that aren't quite true to real life. And I think I'm more, hopefully, I hope I'm more tuned to that. I'm less.
You are.
I'm a little more like tougher on myself about oh, you're really enjoying that piece of acting, but this lady wouldn't really do that right here.
I think you nailed it, Deirdre. I think you got it. My guest has been Deirdre O'Connell. The name of the play is Dana H. It's the Lyceum for 2 more weeks. If you can, you should definitely go see it. Deirdre, thank you so much, and I really appreciate the work that you did on stage.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
This week on the New Yorker Radio Hour, a literary giant publishes his first novel in 48 years.
The novel intuitively struck me as the only medium in which I could actually purge myself of a society going haywire.
The Nobel laureate and Nigerian activist Wole Soyinka. That's the New Yorker Radio Hour from WNYC Studios. Listen on Spotify.